Might I remind you that it's the...
Chairman, we are going live now.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this month's Policy and Resources Committee meeting of the Council. I'm Councillor Mohammed Iqbal. I'm leader of the Council and also chairman of this committee. I will briefly do a roll call of councillors that should be present, and also we have two members of the public who have asked to speak on 2 items on the agenda. So I'll just read your name out. If you can just unmute yourself, please, and just confirm that you're here, then I can take you off. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor David Clegg.
Present.
Councillor Sarah Coburn-Price.
Here.
Councillor Mike Goldthorpe.
Here.
I'm obviously here. Councillor Yasser Iqbal.
Yep, here.
Thank you. Councillor Ashad Mahmood.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Newman. Councillor Brian Newman. No. Councillor Jonathan Nixon.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor David Whip.
Here, I've also got a cat staring at me, but you know, it sat on the county laptop, so I should be okay for the connection.
Well, if I remember, your connection kept going at county meeting, but we'll bear with you.
The connection was okay. It was the cat sat on the keyboard that did all the trouble.
Okay, and then in terms of substitutes, I have Councillor Zafar Ali.
I'm here. Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mohammed Aslam. You're on mute, but I can see you. Well, I could.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Foxley.
Present.
And I assume, Councillor David Whip, that Brian Newman's not answered. So is Councillor Tom Whip subbing for Brian?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's fine. In terms of members of the public who've asked to speak, I have 2 speakers. If you can just confirm that you're here. Mr. Brian Sumner. Mr. Sumner, I think you're with us. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. And then Shazia Shaheen.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you very much. Just for Mr. Sumner and Mrs. Shaheen's benefit, when I come to your items, I will try and deal with them early on in the agenda. I'll bring you both in to speak, and at that time you can just unmute yourself, and I'll allow you to address the committee, and I'll advise how to do that. Thank you very much, colleagues. So moving on to item 1, which is declarations of interest. Does any councillor have any declaration of interest to declare? No. Thank you. Item 2 is public question time. That's to receive for up to a maximum of 15 minutes. Any questions from members of the public? I'm advised by Jane that there are no members of the public on the call. Item 3 is the minutes of the last meeting. Everybody happy that they're a correct record? Anybody disagree? No.
Move them, Chair.
Thank you, Nadeem. Okay, we move then on to the planning applications. What I propose to do is take item 4B, which is the erection of up to 6 dwellings on land to the north of Rockwood on Halifax Road, Nelson. We have a speaker, Mr. Brian Sumner. Mr. Sumner, you're allowed to address the committee for up to 5 minutes. If I think you're getting close to the 5 minutes, I'll interrupt and just let you know. But once you've spoken, unless a member of the committee wants to ask you a direct question, you're not allowed to come back into the debate. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, Mr. Sumner, the floor is yours for up to 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm Brian Sumner from Avalon Planning in Burnley. I'm the agent on this application. What I can advise committee here is that we have a very strong-minded applicant who, if committee refuses application, is minded to appeal. And the reason he feels he has a strong case for that is, firstly, there is an officer recommendation of approval, which doesn't identify any material objection on planning grounds to the scheme. Secondly, the reason it was deferred from Bryfield and Reedley committee, which was apparently based on open space and amenity, although I was at that committee and that wasn't specified what that means, is because if our case is that Pendle at the moment doesn't have a 5-year land supply. And that means if the council is going to raise objections to the scheme, there needs to be a fundamentally overriding reason. In other words, that hires the bar for any objection that might be sustained. We say that in any event, notwithstanding that we are in compliance with your own development plan policy on the location of development, sustainable location, and that's been accepted and acknowledged. And I think if the council were to object on those grounds, you wouldn't get any support from any technical area whatsoever. On the grounds of amenity and this open space issue, it's quite clear when you look at the site that this site is not part of the golf club. It is physically separated from it and is not able to be used for that reason. If you look at the officer report, the loss of this open space is so minuscule compared to the 8 other outdoor recreation sites in Reedley and the 46.95 hectares that's already there. This would lose 0.6 per hectare, so you'd still have 46.35 hectares left, which is well over the council's policy requirement for such recreations in this ward area. So we really feel that there's no grounds for any technical objection to this scheme. Bearing in mind that this is a permission in principle, and if the development goes forward, the council would be faced with a second technical matters application in which it could consider the normal run of things like access and design, a number of houses and so on. But that does not form part of this consideration. We are a principal application. We say that we comply with your policy. We say that even if that's not the case, because the council is not able to demonstrate a 5-year land supply, that's why the council has a housing action plan. And we say that any objection must be considerably overriding to any amenity or open space objection. And if you consider it in the round and the planning decision the council is supposed to take, then I don't think any reasonable person could conclude that those reasons are overriding. I'm therefore hopeful, Chair, that this committee will support the applicant and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Sumner. I appreciate your comments. Is Neil with us? Neil Watson?
Yes, Chairman, I am.
You are, yeah. Neil, is there anything that you need to add before I open it up for debate?
Just one point of clarification from Mr. Sumner. We don't have to have a housing action plan because our calculation for that is based on the standard methodology. So it's just a point of clarification. I don't think it really affects the overall planning balance, though, but we don't have to have one. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks for that, Neil. Okay, who wants to kick off?
Chair, can I kick off? It's Councillor Iqbal.
Yeah, Yasser.
Thank you, Chair. This obviously came to the Bradford and Ridley Area Committee. I think it was the last meeting. Now, this is obviously a new type of application. It's a permission in principle, which committees like ours and those that other members set are rare, but we may see more of them. Now, one of the reasons which we, in fact, one of the main reason which we recommended refusal was on the grounds that there was this loss of open space and amenity. And there have been a number of applications, Chair, and you will be aware of this, that not far from this particular location, there was an application on Halifax Road, Nelson, which isn't very far from there. I know this is on Halifax Road, but it's further down on a similar position. And King's Causeway, there's that land just behind the golf course. There have been a number of applications which, again, we refused on the Bradford and Ridley Area Committee. And this committee then supported. That went to appeal, and we were successful. I think that was 36 dwellings, and that was on the point of loss of open space and amenity. And we were successful. And we have been contacted by residents. So that's only one of the matters. I appreciate that, but it's an important factor, Chair, and people are concerned. And I'm of the view, and our committee, the Bradford and Ridley Area Committee, were of the view that there is going to be an open loss of open space and amenity, and we therefore move for a refusal. And that is what I would move again, Chair, for this committee meeting.
Okay, thanks, Yasser. Zafar, are you seconding Yasser, or are you wanting to speak? Councillor Zafar Ali.
Thank you, Chairman. I could well be, but I do have some questions for Mr. Sumner.
Okay, fine. Fire away.
First question, I may have missed this, Mr. Sumner, in the report, but insofar as the public footpaths go, you may well have seen the countryside in relation to the site layout to accommodate is that going to be possible in the next development?
Mr. Sumner, would you like to answer that question?
Cut out. Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, I think what Councillor Ali is asking is that in terms of the footpaths, the Countryside Access Officer is talking about diversion of footpaths. What Councillor Ali, I think, is trying to clarify from himself is that doable from you?
Well, the formal answer to your question is that doesn't form part of your consideration because this is a principle in development only. So it doesn't consider matters of site layout. And if you were to do so, then you'd be way beyond the legislation under which this application is submitted. But informally, the answer to your question is that this is quite an extensive site, even for 6 dwellings, and there's plenty of room to either divert or accommodate the footpath quite easily, which runs down the back edge of the site. Yes, it can be done, and we've done it before.
Okay, thank you, Mr. You're quite right. The purpose of my question wasn't to substantiate any point of refusal on that point. It was more for clarification. So I appreciate your explanation on that, Mr. Sumner. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zafar. Councillor David Whip.
Thank you, Chairman. I've looked at this site, and it is quite an open area, and the filling in the gap between Rockwood and I'm assuming that there'll be the properties at the top of King's Causeway. You know, it's creating it's almost like ribbon development along the road there, and really instead of having that open aspect, it's closing it in, boxing it off, and I do have some sympathy for the retention of the open space, and I think the principle of losing that is something that does need to be taken into consideration, and so the principle of developing on there, I would have some sympathy with the view that this ought to be refused.
Okay. Do your sympathies extend to seconding Councillor Yasser Iqbal, or?
Yes, I will do, Chairman.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed.
Yes, Chairman. Just a couple of points that have been made in the discussion so far. The report clearly states that the reasons for refusal provided by the Bradfield and Rewley Area Committee are not sufficient or strong enough to support such a claim. And I'd just like to, through you, Chair, ask Neil, in terms of the reasons that have been provided for the loss of open space and amenity, and I know you've stated, but could you please maybe expand on your reasons, why you feel the reasons provided are not strong enough? Through you, Chair.
Neil.
Chairman, a blanket refusal of loss of open space isn't something that's in national or local policy. Chairman, you've got to look at the quantum of open space, its quality, and make a judgment on that based against the other planning merits of the situation. Chairman, here you have open space which isn't good quality, and when you go and see it, it just isn't. It doesn't have a great score in the open space audit, and we've got a significant surplus of that typology in that area. And Chairman, we've had our methodology tried and tested and upheld at appeal. So we know that our assessment methodology is robust. The evidence doesn't support a good argument to say that there is loss of open space. If you do that, if you go on loss of open space, you're effectively saying it's the principle of it that you're objecting to. And that's the reason why we brought it back, because of costs. There's a likelihood of costs being awarded if you simply go on the principle of loss of open space, which you can't do. You need to assess its quality, what else is in the area, and take a judgment from there. Chairman, that does not mean to say you can't refuse PIPs. And we've had a similar situation to this in Colne, where a PIP was refused based on the grounds councillor Whip was speaking about. Apologies, I did go, my computer crashed for a second, so I have not heard the whole debate. But if you believe that there's a visual and impacts, and it affects the setting of the landscape, etc., you can refuse them. It doesn't mean, there's nothing to say you can't. But Chairman, on visual grounds, yes, you can run an argument. I think on loss of open space, it's extremely weak indeed, and I genuinely believe that we will expose ourselves to costs if that's a ground you go on. Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
I don't think we can take that into consideration, what I'm going to say, but Councillor Yasser Iqbal referred to a previous application for 36 properties, which I understand Yasser Iqbal mentioned was refused, and then went to appeal, and the councillors, the area committee's views were taken on board and supported that decision. So that was argued on open space as well, I understand. So how was that successful? Yet you saying, and I know you can't compare like for like, and that we shouldn't be taking that into consideration, but we didn't face any costs in that particular case.
Through you, Chairman, if it's a site I'm thinking of, the application didn't go to appeal. I think the case that you're referring to was refused.
Okay.
But it never went to appeal.
Right. Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Just to clarify, I think that's right for the Halifax. Or the one I was referring to near King's Causeway was the Moorside Avenue application. I think we refused on the basis of loss of amenity. That's the one I was referring to in particular.
Okay, thanks.
I'm probably not going to be popular here, but I can't see sufficient reasons to refuse it. So I'm going to move that we approve this application, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Mike Gulthop, are you seconding Nadeem?
I may well do, but not just at the moment. I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Please, Chairman. Mainly, I've been directing these at Neil Watson. I noticed that the scope of permission in principle is limited to a number of things, one of which is location itself. So I wonder if Neil, through you, Chairman, has got any comments about the note made by Pendle Borough Council's Countryside Access Officer, where he quite clearly says that the planning report is therefore incorrect to state that the loss of the site to outdoor recreation open space is immaterial because of the number of footpaths going across the site, I guess. So is there a view about that comment, Neil, or would you support it?
I think he's just incorrect, if I'm honest, Chairman. It is a comment from the footpaths officer, but I don't think it is material to a permission in principle, Chairman. The design would have to take those on board.
Okay, thanks for that, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, Jonathan, I'll ask the question. Are you seconding Nadeem, or are you wanting to?
Thanks, Chair. I will second Nadeem. Okay. Yes, I will second Nadeem. I was listening to the debate and I've had a look on the Pendle Council website, and because it is only a permission in principle, there's only a red line location plan, and I know exactly where it is in Briarfield, and I took a look on Google Street View, and I can't see how we can argue loss of open space if that is the key argument here, because across the road from it's hectares and hectares of agricultural land. Although it does look a pretty parcel of land, and no doubt will be extremely difficult to build on, and it's regrettable. But I can't see what else we can do really. and it's six properties. Could argue it's just a continuation of the 2 or 3 properties that are right at the end of King's Causeway on the junction with Halifax Road. It's kind of just filling it in, really. So yeah, I would second the dean, Chair.
Okay. Thanks, Jonathan. Councillor David Whip, you wanted to come back?
It was just, Chairman, I was talking about the visual impact, the impact on the landscape, and that was my cause for the concern. And I think that any refusal should be framed around that, rather than the principle of losing the open space. And I think that is an arguable case at appeal.
Okay. Zafar, you indicated you want to come back.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on the point that Councillor David Whip has just made, and he's absolutely right. In terms of the visual impact, in my view, I take regular walks up this particular path and use the area behind the golf course a lot. There will certainly be an impact on that basis, Councillor Whip, and obviously my vote will be supporting both Councillor Iqbal and Councillor Whip on that basis.
Okay. Can I just clarify, Councillor Yasser Iqbal, you moved the motion. Councillor Whip is suggesting that you add visual impact. Are you content to add that or not?
I am, yes.
Well, I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to move to the vote. It's a straight vote between approval or refusal. If you're in favour of the... Oh, sorry. Sarah Coburn-Price has stuck her hand up.
I just wondered whether we could hear what Neil thinks about Councillor Whip's thinking about visual impact.
Neil?
Through you, Chairman. There will clearly be a visual impact. It is a bank, so you'll see it from the easterly direction more so than other directions. It is between 2 sets of buildings. It's a large infill, but it will have a visual impact. Chairman, clearly, if I thought that was sufficient to refuse, then we would have recommended that. But there is an argument to put forward that it does have an impact in that locality. How strong that is, clearly members will vote on that now. My view, it isn't strong enough to get a refusal over the line.
Okay, thanks for that, Neil. Okay, colleagues, if you're in favour of the application, for; if you're against, and if you want to abstain, abstain. So I'll read your name out if you can indicate, please. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed.
For.
Councillor Zafar Ali.
Against.
Councillor Mohammed Aslam.
For.
Councillor David Clegg.
Against.
Councillor Sarah Coburn-Price.
Against.
Councillor Paul Foxley.
For.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Mike Goldthorpe.
For.
Councillor Mohammed Iqbal. Against. Councillor Yasser Iqbal.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Ashad Mahmood.
Against.
Councillor Jonathan Nixon.
For.
Councillor David Whip.
Against.
Councillor Tom Whip.
Against.
Okay. I've not missed anybody, I think. So I make that 5 in favour of approval and 8 in favour of refusal. Is that right, Jen?
Yes, Chairman, that's right.
That's fine. Thank you very much. So that application is refused, colleagues. Thank you. I'm going to deviate from the agenda again, and we have another speaker, so I'm going to take that item, and that's item 10A, which is land at 21 Sefton Street, and this has been referred from Briarfield and Reedley Area Committee again. I have Shazia Shaheen, who's indicated to speak. Mrs. Shaheen, if you unmute yourself, you're entitled to speak for up to 5 minutes in which to address the committee. And as I said before, once you've spoken, you're not allowed to come back unless a councillor wants to ask you a question. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and address the committee, please.
Firstly, I'd like to thank you for letting me speak on my behalf. Firstly, when I did spend all my life savings on the kitchen, which I thought was my beautiful kitchen, but at the end of the day, it's been a worst nightmare. from your side, David Lambert used to come. He was a senior building controller surveyor. He came to my property 3 or 4 times asking for gas and electricals and meters being installed, and he wanted certificates. If I had known there was no planning permission, why did he not say there and then that there's no planning permission and stop the work there and then? I feel like I've lost either way. I've lost out on thousands with a young family in the house. My husband's blood pressure. He's on blood pressure tablets. I'm suffering from anxiety, stress. I've got 2 daughters who are asthmatic. So if you're asking me to knock the kitchen down, my parents are vulnerable. My father's got diabetes. My mother's a heart patient. I can't go to their house because I'm risking their lives, putting some COVID, taking it to them. So to be honest, I've lost either way. I've spent my thousands on my kitchen, but at the end of the day, you just put yourself for 1 minute in my shoes and see how it feels. Because I spent £500 to the solicitor just to sort everything out. I paid planning permission fees. I've got all the receipts to prove everything that I've got in handwritten. And it's just at the end of the day, just put yourself in my shoes and see, how it feels to be vulnerable and losing out on thousands to a cardboard builder. He's definitely in the loop. My backyard is put all sand and everything's falling apart. I've got rats crawling in the back. I've got young kids in the house. What am I supposed to do? I don't have the funds to get it over and done with at the minute because my husband's not working. And if you're asking me to knock it down, I can't do that at the minute because all my last savings are spent on the kitchen. All I can do is get the roof done, which is going to take me a year or so to get the funds together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Shaheen. Before I bring councillors in, Neil, could you just want to bring people up to speed in terms of this particular issue, please?
Yes, Chairman. First of all, no one wants to create hardship for people, clearly, but Chairman, we need to look at the history to this because there's a real issue about the veracity of the planning system and what we do. Chairman, there was an application made for permission for this, which was refused. That went to an appeal. So, Chairman, a planning inspector has looked at this. The planning inspector indicated that in the decision notice, it was dominant, overbearing, creates an unacceptable change to the neighbour's outlook, harm to the living conditions of the occupant of 19 Sefton Street with regard to light and outlook. So, Chairman, it's not simply about the applicant's position here. It is about also the impact it has on neighbours. That has been tested at appeal, Chairman. Clearly, a decision to not do anything with this puts the neighbour in a position where their amenity, their outlook, their living conditions are adversely affected. Chairman, that is, in my view, not what the planning system is there to do. So, Chairman, as hard as it is, and I do accept that it's hard on the applicant, but the law looks at personal circumstances in a specific way so we don't get into these debates. And it was Lloyd Scarman and it was Great Portland Estates who, and what the Supreme Court will say, and the Court of Appeal, you do not take the personal circumstances of people into account unless the planning issues are finely balanced. That is what the law says, Chairman. And now I accept that the applicant's got severe hardships, and I don't want to add to that. But, Chairman, the only advice I can give you is this isn't a marginal case. It's been looked at by a planning inspector. The planning inspector's come out with a very clear decision that this has a detrimental impact on the living environment of the neighbours. So, Chairman, it's not just about the applicant, it's about the neighbours. And this having been to an appeal, I think sets quite clearly the yardstick for us to consider this, Chairman. So as heartfelt, and I understand what the applicant is going through, but Chairman, the decision really is a very straightforward one in my view. based on A, the law, and B, the planning merits of the situation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks for that, Neil. Councillor Yasser Iqbal, you indicated to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I ask a question or two of Neil before I address the committee? Just in terms of the history of this, I think the applicant said that it's only got to here because of issues with a dodgy builder, and that's using her words. In terms of the appeal, Neil, am I right that the appeal was in relation to it was made after the council took action in terms of enforcement? So it wasn't a case of the applicant made an application, it was refused, and they still went ahead and built. Is that right? So the appeal was done retrospectively?
Chairman, the application was retrospective. The appeal was made, and then when the appeal was decision was made, it was subsequent to that enforcement action was taken. So we only took enforcement action after the inspector's decision was issued.
Thank you. And secondly, in terms of the neighbour, I think it was 19 Sefton Street that was being affected. Would it make a difference if 19, and I'm not sure the speaker didn't clarify this, but I understand that the neighbour doesn't have an issue with it. If would the position change, your advice change if that was right?
Chairman, I've not heard that. That's obviously information I haven't had, but the neighbour did object to the planning application. But regardless of that, whether they withdrew their objection or not, it doesn't change that relationship, and the extension would still result in a substandard living environment on that neighbour. We have no information why they would change that opinion, but to answer it, no, it wouldn't make any difference to the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Neil, for answering the questions. Obviously, this chairman came to our area committee last month, and obviously is referred here. This is a case which has a relatively long history, where you heard from the applicant that they were involved in a builder who couldn't do the job properly. It came to this committee, I think, at some stage as well, maybe if not a year, maybe 2 years ago, where I think this committee then approved the enforcement action. The main issue in this application, Chairman, is that because of this builder, it's not been a case of blatant and deliberate disregard for building regulations. You've heard from the speaker that they've paid their planning application fees. David Lambert was going out and seeing the building regulations. That has to be taken into account, Chair. If there was a deliberate disregard for the law or planning applications, then that's a different thing altogether. Now, clearly, that hasn't happened in this case. The builder involved has had issues with other residents in and around Sefton Street, because I've been involved with at least 2 others around about that time, who takes the money and then disappears or doesn't do the job properly, doesn't pay the fees. In fact, I was involved in one near Sefton Street on Halifax Road, where the exact builder did exactly the same thing. Thankfully, we got that issue resolved. So that's something, Chairman, we have to take into account. There has to be, we have to distinguish this case from perhaps others where there has been a blatant disregard for it. That hasn't happened in this case. Now, normally, Chairman, if this comes to this kind of recommendation comes to the committee, we may not have sympathy with this kind of application, but we have to consider the issues which this speaker has highlighted, including the fact that she's got asthmatic kids, that her husband's not working because of the coronavirus. I've been speaking to the husband, Chairman, for the last couple of months. I know how stressed he is because of this. You've heard the stress in the voice of the speaker, who's the wife of Mr. Amish Azad, who's the person I've been speaking to. And we have to distinguish this case, and we have to enforce rules and regulations. Of course we do, but we also have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And from my understanding, having spoken to Mr. Shazad, one of the reasons why this was actually reported to the council was because of the neighbour. There was actually a neighbour dispute rather than a planning dispute, which is why it came to the attention of the council. And I'm told that, in fact, the neighbour doesn't actually have an issue. I understand that there's nothing formally been received, but that's perhaps something that, if the committee is minded to, on the basis of the neighbour not objecting, then that's something that perhaps we could consider. And I think, Chairman, that we have to exercise some discretion, some compassion. Now, if not now, then when can we ever exercise that kind of discretion and compassion? And I would invite the members of this committee to listen to the concerns and allow this application. And of course, we can't do this every application. We have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. In my view, it doesn't set a precedent. And I would move that we do suspend the enforcement action at 21 Sefton Street. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Neil, you've indicated to speak. I just need to ask you a couple of questions, then I'll give you the opportunity. I mean, the report says that we're asking for the extension to reduce to 4 metres. How big is it at the moment?
5.9, Chairman.
5.9. And then second question I've got is in terms of the enforcement notice, obviously that's been served. How long do we've given them till January to comply. Is there some leeway in terms of enforcing the enforcement notice, if you understand what I mean, to give some time to the applicant to do what we wanted to do? That makes sense.
Chairman, yes, that's one discretion that we have with them, that we can elongate the time period. Chairman, I have agreed with them till March because of personal circumstances, but if you thought that a longer period was the right way to go, balancing obviously the impact on the neighbour, then that's something you can perfectly well do.
Okay, fine. Did you want to speak as well, Neil?
Chairman, yeah, it's what Councillor Yasser Iqbal said, and it feels like I'm going to, not to persecute the people, but to get this through. But you can have discretion on things, Chairman, but if you take personal circumstances on board, you don't just deal with it on a case-by-case basis. You change the law on how you deal with applications, and you deal with them based on people's worth. And that's exactly what the planning system and law says you don't do. Otherwise, planning applications aren't based on planning merits, they're based on the merits of an individual person. And John, it sounds like a bit of a lecture here, but that's the fundamental basis of the British planning system, that you deal with it on policies, not on the merits of an individual.
That's fine. We don't object to you lecturing us now and again, Neil. Okay, I've got a number of speakers. I'll take them in the order that I've got them. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed.
Thank you, Chairman. The applicants have spoken to me previously as well about this issue on a number of occasions. So I am aware of the total circumstances in terms of their family circumstances, how much money they've spent, etc. Which I appreciate what Neil said. We can't take that into consideration in terms of deciding whether we should stop the enforcement action or not. But I think for us councillors, we are human beings, and it's natural that we will take that sort of issues into consideration when we're dealing with such problems that we have, and having to make difficult decisions, because we don't want to put people in difficult situations or in hardship as a result of our decision. And this seems to be a case clearly of a person who isn't familiar with the planning system, who wanted to put in an application and was really let down by somebody that paid thousands of pounds to their builder, and who has advised them.
Sorry, Nadeem, just bear with me. Can everybody else please mute themselves? I think there's... Councillor Brian Newman, is that you? No, sorry, go on, Nadeem.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's been a case of this lady being let down by her builder. yes, we'll say, well, that's not the council's fault or problem. That's up to the applicant to make sure that they are getting the correct advice. But there are people genuinely out there, I've come across numerous since I've been a councillor, who do not understand anything about the planning system, and they're relying on other people, especially in this case, relying on builders to guide them correctly. Unfortunately, what's happened in this case is the builder has advised them and let them down. And as Councillor Yasser Iqbal has said, took lots of money, left the job, and left this family in a bad situation. Just want to pick up on a second point in terms of the position of Pendle Council, because I've been involved, as Neil mentioned, in terms of trying to get an extension for to put this right, in other words. And the point made by the lady in terms of the Building Regulations Department having visited the site on more than one occasion, and not really, if there was an issue in terms of planning, I know the different departments, but to Joe Public, they wouldn't know the difference between the planning department and the Building Regulations Department. As far as they're concerned, it's one of the same. So I totally sympathise with the lady when she says, well, if there was an issue, why didn't someone from Pendle Council stop us at an early stage? The third point, which I'll pick up on, is in terms of the issue which I wasn't too aware of in terms of the neighbour. This has started off from the neighbour putting in a complaint to Pendle Council. I mean, if my neighbour was building an extension and I had an issue with it, I wouldn't have waited till the works were completed or nearing completion. I would have complained almost straight away and put a stop to the works that were going on. So I think it's a bit more reading between the lines. That's what's going on. And the point that made in terms of the neighbour possibly wanting to withdraw the objection, I know Neil has replied back to Councillor Iqbal in terms of that really isn't consideration, but I think we have to take that into consideration and use our discretion in that regard. So I think my view would be, in this particular case, based on the individual circumstances, this shouldn't go any further, and we should let this proceed as it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sarah Coburn-Price.
My heart goes out to this lady. This is a heartbreaking circumstance. She has been let down by a builder. Actually, that has happened to me and left us penniless at the time. And now I can quite understand. She's an honest lady. She thought that she was dealing with the council. And how awful to find out that the two departments didn't speak to one another and she was only dealing with a chap who was checking the integrity of the extension. But given that it has been looked at by a planning inspector, I regretfully find that we just don't have any chance other than to say that she must make remediation. I can only plead that we, Pendle Council, show some compassion. I feel that we're slightly implicated here, just simply how it looks as the planning inspector, the building inspector going out. And I wonder how much leeway we can offer for her family to try to put this right. Certainly, it would be so cruel to insist on a brief time frame.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor Paul Foxley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I absolutely agree with what Councillor Sarah Coburn-Price has just said in terms of showing some compassion and leeway in timescales. But I have to say that this is it beggars belief that somebody who has put in for planning and then gone to appeal is not aware that they have not got planning consent. I find that very hard to believe. The issue about a rogue builder is clearly unpleasant and a difficulty which I very much sympathise with the applicant. But at the end of the day, the planning issue here is that we are going to set a precedent if we allow this to proceed and to remain as it is. Clearly, a 5.9 metre deep extension is a lot different to 4 metres. If you look at the neighbour amenity, that's having a very significant impact, which, I mean, we've been here before recently over such issues, and my concern, I have a grave concern that this council is on the precipice of a free-for-all in planning. And I really would urge members to be sensible on this option. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Zafar Ali next.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened quite patiently to colleagues and their remarks. I accept the legal principle and planning principle behind this. But, Chairman, I think if we are going to really try and resolve this matter, I think we need to staple ourselves to the mast, literally. I am going to be seconding Councillor Yasser Iqbal in the suspension of this notice. I think this lady's been through hell and back, and probably there and back again. And I think it's absolutely essential that we take a stance. I appreciate the views of colleagues who have shown and expressed sympathy towards the applicant, but at the same time, haven't obviously come forward to either support or not support, bar Councillor Foxley's remarks, not support the position. So I think under the circumstances, I feel it right to second Councillor Yasser Iqbal under the circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Neil, you're asked to come back. I'll give you the opportunity.
Chairman, it's just one point of clarification. I think we've been slightly criticised here for not speaking to each other between sections. Chairman, just to clarify that the breach was raised by David Lambert, not a neighbour, and that was raised with the developer.
Okay, I don't see any other speakers. Can I just clarify? I think we've still got Councillor Tom Whip, who's subbed at the beginning of the meeting. Councillor Brian Newman, I think you've joined us, but Tom's subbed you at the beginning of the meeting, so I'm not sure whether you want to stay on as a guest or...
We'll have 4 votes, Chairman. It's all right.
Right, Chair, I'll leave this decision up to you. If you'd like me to leave, just say so.
It's not my decision, Brian. It's your decision. I mean, Tom subbed at the beginning of the meeting, so I mean, if I was in your situation, I'd go and enjoy the rest of the evening, but the choice is yours.
I'm happy to tag out, Brian, and let you take over.
No, it's you carry on. I'll leave it with you. Okay.
There you go, David. You're down to 2 now. Right, so Councillor Tom Whip staying on. Thanks, Brian. Okay, I've got a proposal from Councillor Yasser Iqbal, seconded by Councillor Zafar Ali, that we we take no further action in terms of this particular application. So if you're for, if you're against. If you want to abstain, abstain. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed.
For.
Councillor Zafar Ali.
For.
Councillor Mohammed Aslam.
For.
Councillor David Clegg.
Against.
Councillor Sarah Coburn Price.
Against.
Councillor Paul Foxley.
Sorry, Chair, against.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Goldthorpe.
Against.
Sorry, was that against, Mike?
It was indeed.
Thank you. Councillor Mohammed Iqbal. I will be abstaining. Councillor Yasser Iqbal.
For.
Councillor Ashad Mahmood.
For.
Councillor Jonathan Nixon.
Against.
Councillor David Whip.
Against.
Councillor Tom Whip.
Against.
Okay, Jane, I make that 5 in favour, 7 against, 1 abstention.
Yes, I would agree, Chairman.
Okay, can I just make a suggestion to colleagues? I don't know whether it's an additional motion. I mean, Neil has indicated that we've given the lady or the applicants until the end of March. What I was going to suggest, because I wanted to wait for the outcome of this vote, is that we give her a period of 6 months. So basically till the end of, let's say, to the end of June, to try and comply. And then if there's still issues, she can have a conversation with Neil. If people are happy with that course of action, is there anybody against?
Councillor, can I suggest a slightly longer period? And that is because of the position that we're in within a national crisis at the moment. We're not sure when we're going to get out of this. 6 months is, I think, can we say up to 12 months? I think that would give them more time to get things in order. If we knew what was going to happen in the next couple of months, then I think 6 months is sufficient. But I think
we do know what's going to happen. The vaccine will be out by the end of January. Everything back to normal by February. I'll come back to you in a second, Councillor.
I believe that when I see it, Chair.
I know. Tom, you indicated to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. While I'm amenable to an extension of 6 months, I don't think I can be agreeable to any longer than that. As Neil Watson said, we've got to take in the compassion for the neighbours as well. As you say, Chair, they can always come back if there is something stopping them at that point in the year.
Okay,
but I could not support a 12-month.
Okay, I'm getting a whole host of names just to try and move the debate forward. I mean, I'll bring you in if you want to, but I've suggested 6 months and then delegate to Neil to review the situation after 6 months is what I'm proposing. Jonathan, you've indicated to speak.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to say exactly what you just said.
That's
so
fine.
report back in 6 months, and then we can have the crack from there, can't we? We can discuss it again.
That's fine. Mike?
Yes, Chair, I would support that.
Okay, and Nadeem?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think you've kind of covered anyways, come back, but I was going to make the point in terms of what the lady was saying earlier on. If her husband isn't working, they don't have the financial means to do the work, so it's not putting extra pressure on them. They'll have to comply, but just give them, but like you said, we can review it in 6 months if needed.
Okay, that's fine. I'm getting agreement from everybody on that by the looks of it. Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, yeah, so you're shaking your head, but I'm getting majority agreement then. Okay, so Mrs. Shaheen, what will happen is that we will give you 6 months to undertake the works, but if after 6 months or coming up to 6 months we still feel that you're not able to, what I'd ask you to do is get in touch with Neil Watson, and then if need be the committee can review it at that time. Okay, thank you, colleagues. I will go now back to the beginning of the agenda. We're on item 4A, the change of use from dwelling to retail use at 174 Railway Street, Nelson. This is a referral from Nelson Area Committee. Neil, is there anything that you need to add before I open it up?
No, Chairman, I think the issues are pretty well understood.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zafar Ali.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be requesting colleagues to support me on this to approve the application as it was set out and follow the decision as it was set out at Nelson Area Committee. Chairman, there was a lengthy discussion from all colleagues at Nelson Area Committee in relation to the impact of this proposal. It was noted that there weren't many issues locally, and quite frankly, I think it was slightly a tad unfair on this on the occupants at this property to sort of have to fall behind on planning related matters. There's lots of developments now, Chair, which are up and coming in residential areas. I accept the policy around the town centre and town centre sites and obviously commercial premises around the town centre. But under the circumstances and traditionally, knowing this area quite well, Chair, there are a number of other premises already set up on a commercial basis, and for that reason, I think it's unfair that this property owner, is going to be left behind. And I'd kindly request colleagues to support me on approval of this.
Okay. Nadeem, are you seconding Zafar or?
Yes, I'll second Councillor Ali. I'd like to speak on it as well, please, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
Of course, protecting our town centres is crucial and it's vital. But having said that, I think we have to consider each case on its own merits. This area, if people are familiar with the location, it is a mixed-use area. There are commercial properties in and around that area, and this particular property has been used for commercial purposes in the past. It's been used for as a private tuition centre. It's even been used for retail purposes historically, and all they're really doing is bringing that use back for this particular property. Lancashire County Council have been consulted to see whether there's any highway concerns, because that was a slight concern I had, because it is a fairly busy area in terms of traffic. But LCC have come back and not raised any objections. And I think this business and having a commercial use would serve the needs of the public in that area. The report does mention we can take that into consideration, although the report differs from my view, where it says, well, there's other property which can be used for commercial purposes. I think this particular property has been historically used for commercial purposes, and I don't see any objections as to why it shouldn't be used for commercial purposes again. In terms of residential amenity, raises no real concerns, so I'm more than happy to second Councillor Zafar Ali.
Okay, thank you. Councillor David Whip.
Thank you, Chair. Has the property got established use as a commercial premise?
No, it's through you, Chairman. No, it's residential.
Okay. This council
just to help David. I mean, I think going back historically, I think 20, 30 years ago, it used to be a shop, and then the previous occupier or owner before this particular gentleman applied to change it into residential. And this gentleman has bought it obviously as a residential and is now wanting to change it into part commercial, I assume.
Okay. But the answer to my question was no, it hasn't got established use.
No.
I mean, here we go again. We spend years as a planning authority drawing up policies so that we can determine planning applications for the good of the whole of the area. And we have had several applications now where area committees seek to undermine those policies. And it's not just Nelson that you're talking about. If you undermine the policy in Nelson, then you are undermining the policy throughout Pendle. Now, you know, there are applications in Colne, there are applications in West Craven where people might put in to similarly undermine the town centre, and a decision like is being asked for here in Nelson would have the impact of pulling the rug from under his feet. It's quite clear to me that it's against policy. You know, if we're not going to have policies, we're not going to bother with policies, then fair enough, just chuck them all out of the window and, take everything as it comes, except we won't have any policies to determine, and we won't have any policies to defend against those things that we don't want to happen. Mr. Chairman, it's quite clear this ought to be rejected. It hasn't got established use. There's no reason to approve it. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to be meeting as a Nelson Town Deal Board to try and get millions of pounds spent in the middle of Nelson to give the town centre a boost. Well, hang on a minute. What do you want to do? Do you want to defend the town centre, or do you want to give planning applications here, there and everywhere, which are actually kicking the town centre in the teeth. Get your act together. Let's be sensible on this. Let's turn it down.
Thank you, David. Mike? Mike, you're muted. You're still muted. No, I think you're off mute now.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question, really, just before we get to any vote on this. Do we know what kind of retail unit it's going to be? Is it going to be clothing, food, mixed groceries, haberdashery, whatever? Have we any idea about that? Through you, Chairman?
Neil, can you help?
Sorry, just unmuting, Chairman. No, I don't have that information, what it's going to sell. It's not something really I researched on it. It's just a general, it's Class C now, retail unit.
Thank you, Chairman.
Ashad, you're next. Ashad.
Yeah. Just two brief points. Thank you, Chairman. Just two brief points. Yeah, I think the applicant mentioned at the Nelson Area Committee meeting that it's going to be a telephone or mobile phone repair shop. The two brief points I want to make is I think it's already been touched on that this property was used as a commercial property previously, and that was changed to residential, and they're basically just reverting back to part of that into commercial. And I think the other element and the important issue that we need to bear in mind is, if I remember correctly from the Nelson Area Committee discussion, that the shop is going to be open in the evening from about, I think, approx 5:30 onwards till, I can't remember the closing time, I think it was about 9 o'clock or something. So around that time, the Nelson Town Centre is essentially shut. It doesn't affect the vibe, the arguments that's been raised by other councillors. So we support the application.
Okay, so just in terms of supporting an Ashad, I mean, that's information that could be helpful to people. Are you saying that we condition the timing?
If I remember correctly, Mr. Chairman, that's what the applicant said at the meeting, that this was only going to be open in the evenings from 5:30, but that can be conditioned if, if that helps.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Paul Foxley next. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Well, as Councillor Whip has said, this is clearly completely against policy, and if we are going to accept that policies are a useful thing to have, we shouldn't just be chucking them out the window every time it suits us. I don't think there's any ground for approving this in the light of the town centre policies. The sequential test is there for a very good reason. It's part of the strategic thinking that goes into the local plan. It's part of that strategic thinking designed to protect the town centre retail. And, Councillor Whip said exactly what I was going to say in many ways, in terms of I was going to make reference to the Nelson Town deal and the whole idea of, on the one hand, the same councillors who are promoting the regeneration of Nelson Town Centre voting to undermine it by such an application as this is quite preposterous, quite frankly. So I'm hoping that common sense will prevail on this and that it will be refused.
Okay, Jonathan.
Thanks, Chair. It was mentioned earlier that I think it was Councillor Mahmood who said it's previously been a shop or something like that. I mean, perhaps it was a corner shop back in 1950s for penny sweets and stuff, but obviously the policies have changed since then. I'm just wondering, could Neil shed some light on on that, whether because it has been commercial previously converted to residential, does that automatically mean that you can just convert it back? And yeah, echo what Councillor Whip and Foxley have both just said in respect to the town deal. Yeah, I won't be supporting it. But I'd like to hear what Neil has to say about that. The historic use question, please, Chair.
Well, maybe I can help Neil. The answer to your question, Jonathan, is that no, it's not easy enough to revert from one to the other. That's the whole reason that you have to put an application in. Is that right, Neil?
Through you, Chairman, absolutely correct. But I just got Councillor Nixon made a point that I would have made, that policies change over time, and it's situations change, and obviously you've got to deal with the policy base that's in front of you now, and obviously if it needs planning permission, apply those policies, Chairman.
Thank you. Zafar, you've indicated to come back in, and then I've got David Clegg, then I intend to move to the vote.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I do strongly disagree with some of the remarks being made in relation to the negative aspects of allowing, or if this was to be allowed, this proposal to progress. Whilst I am on the Town Deal Board, I'm also aiming to look to support businesses across the town. Whilst we have challenges in the town centre, they will be dealt with the Town Deal Board, and which has its own mission, which has its own aims and objectives. I don't see how this planning permission, as quite rightly colleagues have set out quite clearly, this was a commercial premises once upon a time, is then gone to residential and come back to commercial. So whilst policies do move forward, the demands and needs of the town, move forward as well. And right about now, clearly, the applicant who's invested in this premises to turn it back into commercial feels that it is, a commercial use that would suit the locality. So I strongly disagree with some of the remarks being made by colleagues, and I would once again urge colleagues to look at this from a locality's perspective rather than a town centre perspective. There are commercial premises around the whole of the borough where you've got the town centre, and aside from that, some distance away from that, you've got corner shops, you've got hairdressers, you've got barbers, and all the rest of it. I don't see why. With a condition, as Councillor Astrid Mahmood has pointed out, which I'm happy to include in the proposal, as was discussed at Nelson Area Committee, with the conditions of opening, I don't see why this proposal would have a detrimental effect on the town centre. It offers, from my understanding, a mobile repair facility. Whilst there's mobile repair shops already in the town centre, I think it's good for competition, and certainly for this locality, if that's what the owner and the individual who's invested in this premises feels is the right business to run, I think we should support this business rather than turning it down.
Okay, thank you. And final word to Councillor David Clegg.
Thank you, Chairman. We've got to make the decision on council policy, and just going back over this evening, this is the third item we have discussed. And on all three of them up to now, all we have done is taken pot shots at council policy. And that's not the way we're supposed to be doing it. And I certainly, Chairman, will not be supporting this application. And I've nothing else to say.
Thank you, David. Short and succinct as usual. Okay, I'm going to move to the vote. So if you're in favour of Councillor Zafar Ali's proposal, which is to grant permission subject to timing conditions, whatever they may be, planning officers can deal with it, you're in favour. If you're against, and abstain. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed.
For.
Councillor Zafar Ali.
For.
Councillor Mohammed Aslam.
For.
Councillor David Clegg.
Against.
Councillor Sarah Coleman Price.
Against.
Councillor Paul Foxley.
Against.
Councillor Mike Goldthorpe.
Against.
Councillor Mohammed Iqbal. Abstain. Councillor Yasser Iqbal.
For.
Councillor Ashad Mahmood.
For.
Councillor Jonathan Nixon.
Against.
Councillor David Whip.
Against.
Councillor Tom Whip. Against. Was that against, Tom?
Against, yes.
Okay, thank you. Don't think I've missed anybody. So Jane, I get that 5 in favour, 7 against and 1 abstention.
Yes, I would agree.
Okay, thank you very much. The next item is item 5, which is the council tax base, and he's been quiet all evening. Mr. Langton.
Take it and tell him Zaffa,
Zaffa, you need to mute yourself.
Last time and get that set up, yeah?
Zaffa, you need to mute yourself instead of giving instructions.
So, Chairman, this is
Sorry, Chairman.
Chairman, this is the council's tax base for the next financial year. As you know, the tax base is used in the determination of the council tax, both for this council and for major preceptors and town and parish councils. In fact, it's made up of the individual tax bases for each town and parish council area. You'll see in the report that we refer to various matters, not least the impact of COVID on the council's tax base. So the tax base reflects the number of properties in the borough and equates it to a bandy equivalent. There hasn't been much growth in the borough, as you're aware, in terms of house building. But the major impact here is the growth in the amount of council tax support, which is a deduction from the tax base as a consequence of COVID. And that's reflected in the report on paragraph 18, where we're predicting the cost of council tax support to be next year around £7.9 million. And that's a deduction off the tax base. The other matter that I refer to in the report is the discount presently available for those properties that are empty, that are being brought back into use, where the council agreed previously to provide a discount of 4 weeks, 100%. Given that the tax base is reducing, I am proposing that that discount is removed and that no discount is given for properties that are empty, that are being brought back into use. It has an impact on the tax base. In fact, it increases it. And in the context of the council's financial position, that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. I mean, before I bring other colleagues in terms of the council tax discount issue, I mean, we introduced this roughly 3 years ago because there was a number of genuine, hard-working landlords whose tenants were leaving and they had to do very minor cosmetic refurbishments to properties. And it was agreed to fall in line with other local authorities across the country, where we gave them some breathing space to bring the property up to scratch. And it was felt at the time that 4 weeks was sufficient for a landlord or for a property, if somebody bought it, to do some refurbishment and cosmetic work and either move in themselves or re-rent it back out. And I think that has worked quite well because people are quite clearly understanding that if it's then going to take them longer than 4 weeks, then clearly the discount no longer applies and they have to start paying council tax. So that was an incentive to try and bring properties back into use quickly. The previous Class C, people will remember, used to be 6 months, but obviously that was ended by government a number of years ago. So I'm still of the view that we still continue to give the 4 weeks. I mean, clearly we can pick it up during the budget process, seeing where we are, but I keep harping on back to the government's promise that we won't be shortchanged at any point in time in terms of our budget. So my own view is that in terms of recommendation A, that is removed and that it's just recommendation B and C that we've got. I've got Councillor David Whipp and then Councillor Zafar Ali next.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the empty property relief, I'll listen to what other councillors have to say, but we can't revisit the decision that we have tonight during the rest of the budget setting, and the erosion of the council tax base is quite significant. And looking at the council tax base that we had for the borough as a whole last year, it was bandy equivalents 24,257, and either of the figures that we've got in front of us tonight, well, with the doing away with the empty property relief, it's an erosion of some 300 bandy equivalents and 350 or so bandy equivalents. If that relief isn't done away with. And then the impact on each of the town or parish council precept varies from place to place, but that's going to be quite significant. So the upshot of all that is that even if the precepts remained at their current level in terms of pounds, shillings and pence, that the council tax liability would increase in each of those areas. So it's not an easy decision, and it's not black and white. The erosion in the council tax base means that, all things being even, people are going to have to pay more council tax. And given the financial circumstances that we have at the moment, that is going to be difficult. So I can see the arguments as to why Mr. Langton is recommending doing away the empty property relief. On the other hand, I can understand the arguments. I was one of the people advocating this when we introduced it a few years ago. It made sense, and if we continue to have a rising council tax base, in other words, more properties and fewer discounts, I don't think there would be any difficulty. But I do think this really poses us with a dilemma and a difficult decision.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zafar Ali.
No, Chairman, my hand wasn't from before, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sarah Corbyn-Price.
I totally understood what you were saying there, Councillor Iqbal, in terms of when you take over a house or you're between tenants, you would have to do work. But I also agree that we need the money in our budget. So thinking about it, who are the owners or landlords who cause the council the most, and residents, the most grief? And I live next door to one of those, so I know. It's those houses that have been empty 10 years or more. Is there any opportunity that we could do more at that end to help us out?
Well, at the moment, if a property's been empty for more than 10 years, the maximum premium we can't increase to is 300%.
Chairman, through you, I mean, we are doing as much as we can to, for want of a better phrase, penalise those owners of properties which are empty that are not doing anything to bring them back into use. And to some extent, that's been quite a success. We've got the number of long-term empty properties down to around 800 now, when we were upwards of 2,000 a few years ago. So, through that and a number of other measures like having the empty homes officer and things like that, it's been incredibly successful. So we're doing everything we can, whether that's penalising people or helping them to bring properties back into use, that we can do.
Okay, Nadeem?
Yeah, I mean, this is a difficult balance between balancing our book and making sure that properties are occupied at the earliest opportunity. I mean, if we just talk specifically about Nelson for a second, I mean, we had a number of years ago, there was quite a large problem, particularly in one or two wards where we had a significant number of empty properties. That isn't a major problem, I don't think, at the moment, because a lot of our properties are occupied. But I think it does give an incentive and a push to landlords to make sure the properties are put back on the market and people living in them properties at the earliest opportunity, because the knock-on effect of long-term empty properties, we all know, in terms of antisocial behaviour, in terms of the nuisance, the problems it causes for the neighbours particularly. And it is a difficult one, but I would agree with Councillor Iqbal. I think it has worked. And I think to change that at this stage, I think might be a setback in the long term.
Okay. No other speakers, so the options are the recommendations as set out, or my amendment. Ashad, you wanted to speak? Can't hear a word. You're muted, Asjad.
Yeah, I was going to second your motion, amendment, and I was going to say just briefly again, if I remember correctly, I think number 10 and number 11 Downing Street have both said for at least another 2 years they're going to be fully supporting local councils. I know there are going to be some difficult decisions that we have to make, but in grand scheme of things, something like this is not going to make any significant impact. And I think giving that leeway of 4 weeks gives the opportunity for the landlords to kind of bring the properties to a good standard, as whereas if that opportunity wasn't there, they probably wouldn't bring the properties to a good standard. So yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, and let's hope number 10 and 11 Downing Street stick to the word. Okay, so my amendment is that we delete A and just leave B and C. So if you're in favour of that 4, if you're against it, against, and if you want to abstain, abstain. And if the majority then vote against, I assume the original recommendations are the ones that will pass. Is that clear? Yeah. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed.
4.
Councillor Zafar Ali.
4.
Councillor Mohammed Aslam.
4.
Councillor David Clegg.
4.
Councillor Sarah Coburn Price.
Against.
Councillor Paul Foxley.
4.
Councillor Mike Goldthorpe.
4.
Councillor Mohammed Iqbal. 4. Councillor Yasser Iqbal.
4.
Councillor Ashad Mahmood.
4.
Councillor Jonathan Nixon.
Against.
Councillor David Whip.
4.
Councillor Tom Whip.
Okay, 4, sorry.
Was that 4, Tom?
It was, yeah.
Okay. Jane, I'll make that 11 in favour and 2 against.
Yes, I would agree, Chairman.
But I'm passing my maths tonight, aren't I? Okay, so we've got recommendations. So the recommendations are what were B and C, they're now A and B, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Chairman, could I just say, so we're changing
numbers are different
to, sorry?
Yeah, the numbers
Sorry,
are
I'm
different.
just making the same point as Mr. Langton.
Yeah, it needs to be 23,898.
Okay, that's fine.
It's about 1%.
Thank you. We then move on to the Colne Neighbourhood Plan. This should be pretty quick, I think. Neil, do you want to kick things off?
Well, not in that sense, but I'll start off, Chairman, yes, if I may. Chairman, it's an unusual situation we're kind of in that the body that put the consultation out has made comments on our proposed comments, which is I've not come across that before, but I think it's been it's good to perhaps focus our attention to some of the key issues, and just to emphasise, our role is as a consultee. We're not the originating body. We will be responsible for processing the plan, but we're not there to make it. And Chairman, our role is really to try and improve the plan, to get it through, and on that basis to point out some of the issues that are involved. So, Chairman, I don't want to take too much time. I'm sure you won't want that anyway, but I just wanted to go through a couple of points of clarification which you may want to focus on. Chairman, firstly, in terms of the housing figure and how it's derived, comment has been made about the Part 2 local plan. That's no status. It's not been approved, it's not been agreed, it's not been through any consultation. So, Chairman, the figure that we base it on is the OAN, the objectively assessed need figure of 298 in our core strategy. Chairman, Chairman, there's been some comments about the figures. We've put some additional comments to you about the figure for the housing requirement that the residual housing requirement that the plan has to achieve. And it's something that the town council, when they go to publication on this and in front of the inspector, they'll have to be aware of. The residual requirement is either 77 or 337. Now, why I say that, 77 is based on the methodology that we have approved in our local plan, which includes empty homes. So when we net off the empty homes that have been put back into use, we add those in and that takes off the housing requirement. That's not the national methodology. So an inspector may well say, actually, sorry, neighbourhood plan, your figure is 337 that you've got to provide for. Now, we would support the 77 because that's part of our plan, but it's certainly something that the inspector would have to take on board, and the town needs to be aware of that. So just a couple of points on evidence, and it's really the comments we're trying to emphasise is about the evidence that supports the plan. And it is evidence-based, and if you don't have that in front of you, or inspector doesn't have that, then the plan will come unstuck. An example of that will be Trawden, in their site allocations, didn't have the secondary test for flooding, and that had to be done before the sites were then. Now, there may be more evidence there that isn't in the public domain, but there is, from what we have read, some gaps in that need to be filled. Chairman, just a couple of points. The SA, the sustainability work that's been done, okay, that's fine, but which sets out the sites that come forward. But that's one component of allocating sites. The other lays that you have to put in on there is deliverability. You've got to show that your sites are deliverable, and that's got to be evidenced. My concern is that viability hasn't been taken on board sufficiently, because the SA does refer to viability, but then it says that no sites have been found viable within the viability assessment that the Town Council commissioned. So that's a concern, because the evidence about brownfield delivery is that unless there is a special vehicle, Pearl or something, in which looks at different profit levels and different ways of putting sites together, there isn't current evidence of brownfield delivery. An example would be South Valley. We've been trying to get the South Valley delivered since the Housing Market Renewal Programme for 12, 13 years, and not a single house has been built there, yet there's quite a lot of allocations there. So it does concern me, because the plan will be tested on deliverability, and that's paragraph 17, I think, of the framework requires that. So that concerns me, Chairman. Issues of ownership. If you don't have a willing owner, and the SA does mention that, but it's not clear whether the owners are on board. And for example, Spring Gardens Mill, the owner said not housing. So you can't have a policy which, even if it's a mixed use within there, you can't allocate for housing when a developer's saying, I won't have it, because that site will not be deliverable. Chairman, last 2 points that are of concern. I can't see the evidence on flooding, and that requires a sequential test to happen on flooding. And the evidence may be there, but it's not in the public domain that I can find. But that clearly does determine you should not go to flood zones 2 and 3 first if you've got other sites available. And it doesn't matter if you're over allocating, the same policies apply, because plans can over allocate. And I think that's a point that's been made. We're over allocating. Doesn't matter. Your sites still have to come forward to be deliverable over the plan period. And then the last point I would say, Chairman, is that not a great deal, but some sites are loss of open space, and that has to be evidenced as to why those can be lost. Now, again, there may be work in the background that's not part of the publication, but Chairman, I can't, we've not been able to unearth that. So in the absence of those components, it's difficult for us to judge whether the sites can be delivered, and clearly viability is my major concern. We've expressed that to the Town Council on several occasions, and if it can't be delivered, then the plan won't get through an inspection. So hopefully, Chairman, there are other points there in the report, but they're the main concerns I think that we've brought out. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Neil. Councillors, everybody had a letter from the chairman of the Colne Town Council Neighbourhood Plan Working Group, and she's here tonight as well to, with a different hat on, to shed some light. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you. And I listened really carefully to what Neil had to say. And in that letter, if you read it, you saw that a lot of the sort of wording things and various changes we accept, and we will work very hard to implement those before Regulation 16. With regard to the flooding and the viability, I'm afraid I have to plead mea culpa because, as Neil knows, our planning consultant became very ill just days before the formal consultation. And essentially, it was left to amateurs, me and the Colne Town Council officers, to put all the documents on. And we thought we'd put all the documents on. Now, we have put the extra documents on now. They were always there. So I apologise for that, but we were in, and Neil knows, an invidious and difficult position. I have a lot of ground to cover, and I didn't want to forget anything. So if you, please, if you would just listen for a second, I've written a little speech so it doesn't actually miss any of the points.
Shall I invoke the 5-minute rule on you, Sarah?
I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
Okay,
Not if you heckle me in the middle. I don't want points taken off or seconds taken off. So I want to start with the comments about the extent and timing of the consultation. The consultation started on the 26th of October, and it was originally to run for 7 weeks, which is 1 week longer than required. I had a telephone call with Neil in the week of the 26th, so towards the end of that week, to confirm that the consultation was underway. The reference that Pendle should be notified and sent a copy prior to the public consultation is not what Regulation 14C says. It says it should be done at the same time as the other consultees. According to our consultants, this is perfectly normal. The working group will admit that the CTC officers were slow in sending out the emails, but they did send about 300 out, and these drifted into the following week. Junior staff at CTC presumably sent them out in alphabetical order. So P was for Pendle, and you did not get your email until the 4th of November. The consultees covered all the statutory bodies, the local businesses, the local organisations and local people, as well as all the people who own a heritage structure in the Colne list. The officers' report notes the COVID-related extension to the 8th of January. So I do feel that we didn't give enough time. That's now irrelevant, and I would like that struck from your advice. I'm pleased to see that we were applauded for the innovative consultation approach in times of COVID, and all of these efforts will be noted in our consultation statement, as well as the website. We did a poster campaign in the middle of Colne, and the Foxleys were out there with the posters. I did 14 days in the glass box with a big display. People were stopping looking at it. We promoted it on social media with promoted posts on Facebook. We did Twitter. We did press releases, I think 5 in the local press. We've done 11 Zoom sessions with members of the public and the working group. We've done a Colne bid newsletter to 330 businesses, and we did a business-only survey. So I hope that that will be seen as a comprehensive consultation. Similarly, the comments on failures of evidence-based documents and the information on plans and maps are incorrect. This is because, as well as the plan, we have got extra documents, and they are on our website for housing sites and local green spaces. They all have maps as well. And I don't think that they were seen by that officer that did the response, because he says that there aren't any maps, but there are, and they're in these documents. We didn't originally put the external reports for viability and flood risk on the website. I've explained all of that, and I'm very sorry. In fact, we have put them on the website now. However, I would like to say that the viability assessment that we put on our website simply says that nothing in Colne is viable, much like the Lambert report that Pendle has commissioned for the local plan part 2. It is a fundamental issue for everyone, and it will be tested by an inspector. The flood risk assessments for South Valley are in Zone 3, and the exceptions test can be met, and sustainable sites could be delivered with suitable flood risk mitigations built in. I'd like to sort of talk about hollowing out, and that was in the news yesterday, and that is really the rationale from our plan. Our neighbourhood plan involves not only councillors from both parties, but also members of the public and special interest groups. So yesterday, a £100 million fund to level up the North's towns and cities was announced. We would aim to tap into this. There is a difference between viability and deliverability. And we would like to promote sustainable development as per NPPF Paras 1117 and 1118 to develop a clear strategy for housing delivery, not exclusively, but on mainly brownfield sites. We know that there isn't a brownfield first policy. We would like to avoid the hollowing out in Colne that is already happening. The more we designate green fields, the less viable our brownfield sites become, and the more hollowing out occurs. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is not sustainable for any town in Pendle to just have housing estates around the edge. It's not sustainable from a transport or an eco perspective. Delivery of housing on brownfield land in Colne is a challenge. There is no denying it. And some commercial developers are not prepared to rise to this challenge, especially when they believe that they can build on green spaces. The discussions I've held with bodies like Together Housing, Barnfield and Calico indicate that there are grants available for their projects, and many of the sites that we have highlighted, which is 28, I mean it is over delivery, would be appropriate to their business model. Hence, urban delivery can happen with government and council support. I was speaking to a lady who's the Director of Housing at Calico only yesterday, and she was telling me all about Burnley Wood, how that was supported. They initially invested in that area, and now she said they couldn't afford to build there because the private money's come in after the public money, and it's a very sustainable area. Regarding the targets and housing numbers, as the growth figures I circulated show, our overall housing growth is low and possibly negative. The number of houses that we need with 3 or more bedrooms will probably reduce based on that little graph that I put in my letter. Our ageing population needs mainly flats and bungalows, and these can be accommodated sustainably within the settlement boundary. I repeat my call and echo that of the other councillors for Pendle to use the new algorithms for calculating housing targets in the future when they come forward, and aim for a number that gives us some control over our destiny as a borough. We understand the logic running through the calculations involving LV1 and SDP3, but the reserve site of LV8 for Colne, which is Greenfield, could be replaced by one or more of the sites identified in our CNDP6, and the flexibility could be shown to the inspector. We admit that we don't have everyone's formal confirmation that they are willing to see their sites developed. We have a fair proportion, and we have verbal confirmation from some people. We will work to get these before Regulation 16 so that we have them. In conclusion, this draft response to the consultation does need a rewrite, as it does not take into account the supporting documents, such as the housing assessment, the heritage list, and the local green spaces, nor does it note the thorough and extended consultation that we have carried out that will have stretched for more than 11 weeks. We are the elected members of Colne, and we've worked so hard over 3 years for our community, with our community, to find these sites. I mean, you've got to admit, it's pretty phenomenal that we've identified 28 sites and not one resident so far has written in to us. We've got loads of them that have, but they've not written in to say they didn't want that site near them. We have got community buy-in. And how rare is that? This is the point of neighbourhood planning. It's grassroots planning. Not all of the sites made the cut either. We only scored the ones scoring more than 130. We genuinely tried to put forward as many as possible and as many different kinds and all over the town to show willing for the neighbourhood plan. So I hope I hope I can persuade you that some changes should be made to this response that we think is a little unfair in places and perfectly fair in other places.
Thank you, Sarah. That was bang on 5 minutes as well. I've got Jonathan and David who want to come in, but I'll just say a few words. I mean, first of all, I want to congratulate Colne Town Council in terms of doing the work that they've done. Clearly, as Sarah says, and I'm pinching one of her words, it's a phenomenal effort for volunteers in that sense to do what you've done. And I think as leader of this council, I want to, and if you could pass on my congratulations to the Town Council, I'd appreciate that, Sarah and David Clegg. In terms of a response from Pennell, I mean, we have no intention to be obstructive to the core neighbourhood plan, and you know, some of the points that you make are clearly information that's come to light, and Neil has no intention on behalf of Pendle being obstructive as well. So what I was going to suggest was that rather than us agreeing the response as is set out in Appendix 1, that if people were happy to delegate it to group leaders to agree a response with Neil, and I'm not sure whether Dean would want to be part of this, but Neil primarily and Dean if he wants to be. But we will take into account what Colne Town Council's wishes and desires are, the people of Colne. But I want to make it abundantly clear that we are not wanting to be obstructive at all. We want to work with you for the betterment of Colne. So I'm suggesting that, but obviously colleagues can contribute as they wish. Jonathan, I've got you next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that. I would agree. I mean, obviously, Councillor Coburn-Price has spoken from the heart completely. Hopefully, she would agree with Councillor Iqbal's proposal there as well, because I think that's a fair and reasonable thing to do. Yes, I've been a town councillor for only 4 years. I think it is, or 5 years now. And the neighbourhood plan is by far and away the most interesting and exciting project that I've worked on in my time as a proud Colner working for the people of Colne, the people who elect us. It was rather, upsetting is probably too strong a term to use, but the response from Pendle Council, albeit Councillor Iqbal's just said there's no intention of being obstructive, does initially come across as slightly obstructive. So it was a bit disheartening to see that all our hard work and endeavours have not been met completely in a sort of friendly manner, but that's been completely poo-pooed by Councillor Iqbal just then, so that's fine. It has taken a long time to get to this point, and the Colne councillors who have been heavily involved in the putting together the neighbourhood plan would be sorely disappointed if there was no support whatsoever from Pendleborough Council, because Sarah has said it's the people of Colne who are elected by Colners to represent them, and the whole point of neighbourhood planning is to devolve things down effectively down the ladder, so the people of Colne have a say in the future of their town in many aspects, not just land allocation and development, it's heritage, future employment opportunities and the like. So it's not just about housing developments, there's a whole myriad of things that members must consider when considering the Colne neighbourhood plan or any neighbourhood plan. I would just say that I think Matt Kennedy, I've never heard of Matt Kennedy before, so forgive me, I don't know whether he's a true Colner or not, who's put together this anti-Colne report, has ever been to a Colne Town Council meeting where we discussed the spelling of Alkincoats. Page 11, Alkincoats has an E in it. It was discussed at length, believe it or not. And it was decided that Alkincoats has an E in its name. So that's initial feedback for Matthew there. I'll just finish off, Chair, because I mean, I can't by any means follow what Councillor Coburn-Price has said. It will be fantastic to get member support on the neighbourhood plan, and I'm happy that Councillor Iqbal has suggested that it's up to group leaders to discuss amongst themselves how to word an appropriate response. I would personally like to be involved in that, if I may, through you, Chair. Obviously, Nadim's our group leader. I will speak to Nadim about that. That's all I've got to say. I would like to see us have more support for it. Thank you, Chair.
Fine. Just before I bring David in, Jonathan, I think the comments that you make about, and using your words, poo-pooing the plans, clearly the response that was set out in the committee papers was based on the information that was available to our officers. We've moved on since then. and obviously we are where we are tonight. Hence the reason that I wouldn't support the response as it's set out, and I think officers get that message. David.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to comment on the substance really, but the people of Colne would not thank us if a neighbourhood plan was put forward, which an inspector criticised and changed in unfortunate ways. So I think it is important that it does cover the ground that's necessary, and I think the mechanism of delegating a response to Mr. Watson in consultation with group leaders is the way forward, so that we can, as a borough council, and obviously we're here as borough councillors, that we can give constructive criticism which is helpful to drawing up a plan which will be robust enough to stand examination by a government inspector and hopefully be adopted in due course.
Thank you. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to just say that really just reiterate the enormous effort that goes into such a thing as this neighbourhood plan, and I do hope that the response that is arrived at by Pendle is a little more constructive than it is after the additional information and the comments that have been made are taken into account. Having said that, I fully accept and welcome some of the criticism from the comment, and would support that going forward. I was pretty well horrified when attending one of the consultation sessions on the town centre redevelopment zone, which was perhaps could be described as a bit of a baby of mine, in as much as I took a particular interest in that area of the plan, to find that when we tried to refer to the map, it was absent, and that's been pointed out. It's being rectified now, but that kind of schoolboy error is a little embarrassing, and frankly was not the fault of the town council, but if I'm being blunt about it, our consultants, sadly. But that's water under the bridge, and those sort of things can be readily addressed. I do think that we need to be aware that Colne has made a very genuine effort here to address the housing need, but perhaps in a slightly different way than is more conventional. I've been in an awful lot of meetings where those allocations have been considered and finally arrived at. And if there is additional evidence base required, I'm sure that can be provided for the detail of the process, which I believe is purely based on Pendle's own process that was suggested. It's all there to be scrutinised. So I don't have any great concerns about any of that, but I do hope that that it can gain wholehearted support in principle from this council, because clearly there was a bit, being blunt about it, there was a bit of a cock up over distribution of the initial consultation document. It would have been great if it had gone to Pendle Council on day one. It clearly didn't. I think Colne Town Council, I'm not going to say anything about officers, but you know, it's unfortunate, but it happened. But let's face it, we've got an 11-week period now, so that comment, if that could be taken out about, you know, not consulting at an appropriate time, it's not helpful. If an inspector reads that, even though at the end of the day it doesn't actually apply, that would be a shame. So yeah, I personally, like Councillor Nixon, would like to feel that there was some involvement with the Pendle response, but I have to accept that you know, there is a difference between our role as Pendle councillors and well, I'm not even a town councillor, just to be clear. My involvement is my legacy, perhaps, of being, I'm on the working group of the Colne Neighbourhood Plan, but I am no longer. I haven't been a town councillor, as many of you know, for some time now. So, you know, that is my commitment to it. I am very keen to see it succeed, and I hope that we get support. Thank you.
Okay. Nadeem?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think the work done by the Colne Council has been tremendous, and great effort has been put in by many people and many volunteers who've dedicated lots of time to this. I take on board the comments made by Paul, by Jonathan, in terms of they want to be involved in what happens this going forward, because this is going to have long-term implications for Colne particularly. So I think my suggestion would be that the comments particularly made by Sarah at the beginning when she did a brilliant speech was, and I think we need to address some of the concerns and suggestions put forward by Sarah. And I think to do that, and also to involve Colne councillors, I would suggest that we defer this and leave this till the next P&R meeting, and then this is discussed again at that stage, addressing the points made by Sarah. That would be my...
I take on board what you're saying, Nadeem, but the reason that I suggested that it be delegated to group leaders is I think as the three of us, we can step back, because no disrespect to Sarah, Jonathan, Paul, and David Clegg, you know, it's very difficult to distinguish yourself then. Are you speaking as a Colne Town councillor, or are you speaking a Colne Pendlebury councillor? And I think the whole purpose of the three group leaders coming together to deal with it was that we would have a neutral aspect, taking into board that my comments that we want to work with the town council, I think will give some confidence to colleagues from the town council who are also borough councillors on this committee tonight. But the other option, to defer it to the next committee, I think we're not really going to get very far. We'll get bogged down. I think I've confidence in Neil, David, yourself, and me to agree a response from Pendle, and then we'll have that dialogue with the town council. It's not a case of we'll send the response and say there you go. We'll draft something. We'll share it with, for example, if it's Sarah that we're sharing it with on behalf of the town council, not as a Pendle councillor. I'm happy to do that, but we need to agree to the response. I mean, if there's clear criticism that we need to make of the town council, and I have no intention of doing that, I want to place on record, then we'll be constructive, but we'll do it in a way that the town council understand where we're coming from. So I'm not supportive of your suggestion to involve the Colne councillors, and I'm not dishing them in any way. I just think if I was in their situation, it's very difficult, especially for example, somebody like Sarah, to take off a Colne council hat and put on a Pendle councillor hat, because she's that involved in the process. Sarah, you want to come in? Then I'll bring Neil in, and then we'll move progress.
I fully understand your thoughts there, Councillor Iqbal. Perhaps the nicest thing that I could do is perhaps just put highlighter pen on the document, just so that you focus on those little bits, because actually, as I said at the beginning of my speech, there's loads that we do accept and we think is useful, we're grateful for, and we will be working really hard to address it. You know, absolutely. So we're grateful for that. So we just need to separate out the other stuff.
That's fine. I get worried when I see highlighted words, Sarah, because my school teacher used to highlight all my errors. Neil, I'll give you the final word to you, then we'll move on.
Just a couple of brief points. We can't delay because the consultation finishes before next P&R. So, Chairman, that's not an option if you want to make comments. Chairman, quite happy to do what you suggest, and I don't want this to appear that we're being destructive, but I've sat through 2 EIPs for local plans and countless cross-examinations. Not that you will get cross-examined here. So I know that if at inquiry, for example, they will say to you, or before they'll accept it, did you consult in time? Sorry, not interested in your administration processes, and we get this. I want to see documents, please. So you have to be compliant with the regulations, and if you're not, then you don't get past the starting block, and that has to be said, obviously. So it's not being destructive here. It's just pointing out what you will face, because you'll have to do that, Chairman. Secondly, I think our comments are that we're putting forward to safeguard your the town council's position. If you go into any inquiry EIP, you've got objectors to it who put consultants in play, they will pour over everything. And if you've not got a robust enough and credible evidence base that sequentially takes you through that process, it opens the door, for example, for other developments to come forward. And that's a point that I think I've made in face-to-face meetings, etc., with the town council on several occasions. So the comments aren't destructive. They're there to make sure that the plan is robust. And if you can answer those questions about the evidence base, then you're sound to go into your Regulation 16. If you can't answer those questions, then you should be thinking about re-looking at things. So they're thought-provoking as much as anything, just to make sure that the town council can provide that chain of evidence that will be needed. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Neil, and thank you, colleagues, for that debate. I think it was helpful. Okay, so moving on to item 7, the acquisition of Trafalgar House, next door to Dean's office. Dean, is there anything you need to add?
No, I don't think I do need, Chairman. It's a fairly straightforward report. Hopefully members agree with the proposal to acquire the site to use the money that we've been advanced through the Nelson Town deal. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Neil. I mean, in terms of the recommendations, I'm happy to move those. I mean, I'm grateful to Dean and the owner of the building coming to an agreement a couple of weeks ago. I mean, clearly, as the report says, that the owners paid over £800,000 for it, and up to a few months ago, the asking price was around £600,000. So I think it's a worthwhile deal for the council, obviously utilising the money that we've got. There's some debate around the conservation area issue, and we'll have that conversation with Neil at some point. But the purpose of tonight's meeting is to agree the acquisition and obviously give Dean the final say so in terms of pursuing the options. But there'll be a planning application that comes forward, and obviously the conservation area issue will be picked up as part of the planning process. So I move the recommendations. Councillor Zaffarelli.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second you on the proposal. And yes, you're quite right. There are going to be a couple of matters that need to be resolved in terms of, because the report obviously mentions itself, excuse me, the actual final, image of the parcel of land. Is it a whole or part demolition? Of course, there's going to be work on that. But yeah, I'm more than happy to second you on the proposal, Chair.
Thank you. Nadeem, I saw your hand up. It's still up. Go on, Nadeem.
Yeah, I mean, this is a prime location in Nelson Town Centre, which has been lying empty for many years. And the report mentions, in terms of the vandalism, antisocial behaviour that's been created as a result of it. And there is an eyesore in the town centre in a prominent position next to the town hall. And it's not ideal. But I've got questions in terms of the comment you've made in terms of, you mentioned the conservation, and that does concern me, because previously we've been talking about in other items, talking about council policy, but yet this report just basically just mentions, I accept, it does mention conservation, that it is in a conservation area, but going forward, once we've compulsory purchased it, there's a suggestion that it's going to be used, going to be demolished, it's going to be a car park, up to 30 car parking spaces. Is that the official position, and is that what we want to use this site for? That's a question I'd like an answer to, please.
Well, I'll answer it from my aspect, and Dean can answer from his aspect. Yeah. I mean, we're not CPOing it. It's been brought in agreement with the owner. The option was at some point for the council to CPO it, and that would have been a costly exercise for the council. Now we're clear that this is not a CPO. This is now a willing seller and a willing buyer. In terms of the use of it, I mean, clearly, you know, you're aware as much as anybody else that in terms of the town centre plan and the town deal, the board has identified a clear need for car parking in the town centre following the demolition of the multi-storey car park, which is no longer a multi-storey car park. And this is a building that's been there, as you know, for at least a decade, and nothing's been done. And it really is an eyesore in the centre of the town, which needs dealing with. So my preference is that, yes, we acquire it, do some form of demolition, and look to address the parking issue that the town centre will require at some point. But it's not a CPO, let's get that clear. Dean, is there anything that you need to add?
Yes, Chairman, I have about 20 people who are on this side of the building of the town hall who would be thankful for that building not to be there. They've looked at it for the last 15, 20 years, and it's deteriorated over that period of time. I think probably what I'd say to members is, whilst the outside might look reasonably sturdy, our impression of the inside is this is nothing like what it has been, and it has deteriorated over that period of time. It's a building that needs to go, and as we've said in the report, there is a need for car parking, not least because of the demolition of the multi-storey car park as well, and it forms part of that bigger plan for providing that level of parking for Nelson Town Centre.
Dean, did you want to come back?
Yeah, please. Yeah, in terms of the conservation, so where does that? So we've basically, what we're saying is, I know it's a decision for us, council, at a later stage to decide whether we're going to demolish this building or not. But it clearly states that's what will happen with this. What's the significance in terms of the building being in a conservation area? Because as Dean mentioned, from outside it is a beautiful building. So where does that fit in with that policy in terms of conservation?
I mean, in terms of the conservation debate, that's a debate that Neil and his colleagues will be chomping at the bits to tell us about the conservation area. I mean, that's not a debate for tonight, with respect. You know, Dean's right that most of the building from outside doesn't look, well, not most, I'll rephrase that. Part of the frontage of the building really looks as though it could do with a proper clean, and would be really appealing. But I mean, I've seen from inside what state it is, and you know, somebody has approached the council to say, look, we'll buy it off you, but you're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds. And as soon as you mention those type of figures to people, it scares them off. They think that it's perfect inside. It's definitely not perfect. But the issue around conservation will be picked up as part of the planning process.
Just a second question, in terms of the car parking, what's the thinking, Dean? Is it going to be car parking for people shopping? Because I know we've had discussion in the past where it's been mentioned in terms of the Air Centre that one of the reasons why the Air Centre isn't doing so well, or people don't want to book it, is because of the lack of parking. So is the thinking possibly in the future, because we've had reports in the past about the future of the Air Centre, are we looking this car parking space specifically for the Air Centre?
Through you, Chairman, the plans aren't as developed as that yet. I think it's in principle, where I'm thinking is that it probably is best used for car parking as part of a wider car parking strategy. You'll have seen as part of the Nelson Town deal work that what we need to do is really look at how traffic moves around the town centre, but equally how traffic stays in the town centre, and reviewing the car parking strategy that we've got. Again, I mentioned the multi-storey car park, which is gone, so that's clearly having an impact on parking around the town centre. So this will provide us with a bit more flexibility about how we deliver that strategy. But it's just too early to say, if I'm honest.
Thank you. That's fine.
Okay, Sarah, I've got you next.
As far as I understand it, anything that you do in a conservation area, development-wise, has to be seen to enhance that conservation area. And I would very much like to see this purchase, which gives the council flexibility, deals with antisocial behaviour and other issues, decoupled from demolition. We don't have anything here from Rosemary Lyons about the impact on the conservation area, and that surely needs to be discussed. I think we're in a position here that's a bit like the recent 2017 knocking down of the Rottenstall Town Hall extension. A similar, not as beautiful as the Town Hall building, but still sits within the setting and is an important part of the conservation area. That building was knocked down to quite a lot of furore for 10 parking spaces. This is 30. Do 30 parked cars in the conservation area enhance it? I would say not. And I also would say that we should learn the lessons from the past. You know, the councillors in Cone who knocked down some of the best buildings in Cone at the top of Market Street would have said in 1972 or whenever they had the conversation, this is a shabby old building. It is not fit for purpose anymore. It needs a fortune spending on it. It's old fashioned, it's Victorian, it's whatever. And they thought, let's have a clean sweep. Let's get rid of this rather annoying building that's in our way, knock it down and put something else. And we look back on those councillors now who made their decisions, they thought, perfectly with all the information that they had, and we say those people spoilt towns up and down the country because it was a problem and it needed to be got rid of. And I think sometimes we have to say, yes, it's a problem and we need to tackle it and we need to enhance and protect our towns. And so I would support the acquisition of the building. Sounds like Dean's got a bargain, but I would hate to see on this small amount of evidence, we don't have any structural reports, we don't have anything, on this small amount of evidence for us to say tonight, oh, you know, we'll just make a car park in the conservation area. I think that would be a rash decision that future generations of councillors would look back on and said, see what they did to Nelson.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. David?
Well, I can understand the heritage argument, and I think comparisons to Cone are probably a little bit misguided, in that Nelson had the heart ripped out of it as well, you know, sort of decades ago. But I remember that building when it was the education offices. I remember when Nelson and Cone College had their catering unit there. I remember having meals provided by the students in that building. So let's get Nelson and Cone College to take it back on as an adjunct of the college. You know, there's probably loads of fanciful things that we can do. But let's be quite clear. The proposal on the table is not to buy an asset. The proposal on the table is to acquire a liability. And, you know, lumps of stone have been falling off that building. And I've not seen inside it. I haven't been inside it for, you know, probably since it was an education office. But, you know, if the talk tonight is, oh, well, acquire it and, you know, do something with it as a building, then I would vote against acquiring it, because I'd rather leave the liability with somebody else. Thank you very much. You know, let's not even go there. Nelson is crying out for car parking. It's one of the top issues that has come up with any of the consultations that have been carried out. The money has been given to Pendle Council to spend by the 31st of March. This is bringing together various strands in a realistic and sensible proposal that will get rid of a drugs den and provide something functional for the centre of Nelson. So if that's the way that we're looking at it, then let's crack on. If people are going to say, right, well, we don't want to demolish it, we want to retain it and want to have some sort of use that nobody knows what that use might be because the current owners haven't been able to find a use for the last decade and a half, then let's not touch it with a barge pole.
Thank you. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a difficult position. I certainly accept, in as much as clearly there aren't users falling over themselves to make use of this kind of building in Nelson, in that location. But I do agree with what Sarah was saying about not repeating past mistakes. I was going to say I got sick of hearing. I don't. I am forever hearing, I will say, people in Colne and surrounding area, people who've moved to Australia and still hold Colne in high regard from when they did live there, etc., who continually lambast the councillors of the past for some pretty shocking decisions. And they are very difficult decisions when you have as Councillor Whip has quite rightly said, a heritage, not a heritage asset, but a heritage liability. It's a financial liability. There is a problem. There is always a funding gap with trying to make a property like that work for development. So I read this report with some with some enthusiasm, I must admit, until I got to the point where it said about parking, and then my heart sank. Can I just tell you I mean, one of the issues I have about Colne is that it's full of in terms of its urban structure and landscape, it has missing teeth, and that is primarily due to what I would call the provision of opportunist car parks. So pull a building down, what should we do with the land? Oh, let's have another car park. I am somewhat unpopular, well, probably universally, but among some, as being probably the only town councillor at the time in Colne who advocated that Colne actually had too much parking. But I still believe that to be the case. I don't think it does the town any favours to have so many missing teeth. And this is there is an element of that here. And I'm going to finish in a second, but I'm just going to tell you about an experience I had when I was doing work with the Christie Hospital. I was working as an architect on the what is now the Manchester Cancer Research Centre as part of the Christie. So it's a huge site, huge number of people coming and going to the hospital, and parking is a massive issue because it's slapped right in the middle of a residential area. Bad planning, but it's there and it's expanding and it's forever expanding. So parking. So there was a proposal on the table at the same time as we were doing the plans for the new Cancer Research Centre for the Christie to build a multi-storey car park on the back of the same site, part of the same site, to alleviate their real parking issues. and it was right next to the residential street. It was, you know, it wasn't where you would choose to put a parking, let alone multi-story car parking, but the Christie felt that they had no other option. And clearly, that's a really important use, cancer research and cancer care. However, they were wise enough to not put the two in as one planning application, and the planning application for the car park failed. And the result of that was that the Christie reassessed their parking strategy, and they coped, and they provided other types of provision, and they encouraged staff to use car sharing and all sorts of other things, and they reduced the requirement to some extent for car parking. And they were forced to be very, very imaginative about the issue. And so I offer that as an experience, because now on that same piece of land is the Maggie's Centre Cancer Care Centre in that part of Manchester. And to me, yeah, I mean, it was our office proposing to do the multi-story car park. It wasn't something that I was designing, but I was doing the cancer building. But yeah, I just urge you to not jump in and say, oh, let's just flatten it and make a car park willy-nilly. It does sound, if there's no structural report, if there's no comment from a conservation officer, that the financial urgency, because of the availability of a lump of money, is driving this, and I do have a little bit of concern that may be clouding people's judgment. So I don't necessarily advocate that it even stays, but I do advocate that it's properly evaluated and considered. And I appreciate that there's a desire for car parking. And what do I know? I don't live in Nelson. I don't work in Nelson. But as part of the whole town centre strategy, there is always more than one way of achieving an outcome, is what I'm getting at. And I urge you to look carefully at this before just jumping in. So I would support the acquisition of the site, but not if it's automatically going to be a car park with no further consideration.
Thanks, Paul. Final word to Asjad on this, and then we'll move on. Asjad.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, in principle, I'm in favour of acquiring this site. It has been empty. A lot of things have been said, so I won't repeat that. But it is an historic building. It's a major landmark in Nelson, and it's in conservation area. So I think we've got to bear all these things in mind. How what we're going to do with this building once we've acquired it. In the report, number 10, it kind of very clearly says we've acquired this £750,000 funding to prevent further decline and allow for future redevelopment of a site. This is not a redevelopment of a site. Demolition isn't redevelopment, making it into a car park. So I think, yeah, happy to support it in principle, but not for a car park site. The car parking issue, I think we raised this from Nelson area committee point of view a couple of years back, when we were saying to have to help a centre to have long stay car park at the current Home Bargain site, but that wasn't taken up for some reason. I'm not quite sure what the issue was, but like I say, that wasn't taken up. That didn't proceed, so nothing got done. Probably the will wasn't there. Regarding, again, car parking. The former bus station site is available. I know there's certain issues. It's in the private hands, but currently we have rock bottom interest rates, just like we did last year with the remortgaging of number 1 Market Street, and also I think it was the A Centre. We are quite remortgaged those. So I think that if we look at different options and avenues for funding, if you're going to acquire that prime site, that will help the situation. But I think, in favour of purchasing this property, it's a much cheaper price than the original owner paid for. But I think it needs to be redeveloped. Like I say, a lot of history there in conservation area. And I think it was, we were only going back again, I think early this year with the former, the site on the cemetery on the Walton Lane. And there was similar principles we were arguing. A lot of history there. It's not in conservation area. I know it's a building. It's, I think it's a Grade 2 listed building, but I think we've got to protect these sites and redevelop. I think if the will is there, we can occupy these and improve. So, happy to support the purchase, but for redevelopment.
Okay. Before I bring Dean in, I mean, I think every single one of us would be more than happy to purchase it. And if we were awash with money or somebody was prepared to give us the money, would redevelop it. But the question that I pose to those councillors that want to redevelop it is redevelop it into what? There clearly needs to be redeveloped. If there's going to be a redevelopment, you can't just say, look, let's redevelop it, but have no business case to say what we redevelop it into. But fundamentally, when I met with the owners are multi-billionaires. And even he, when he came to look at it, said, my God, why on earth did I pay so much money for this? And, these are businessmen. They're not councillors. They're not council officers. These are businessmen who want to make money. Now, if as a business they're willing to take a roughly, £500,000 hit on their sale, as somebody has said, that that's really good dealing by Dean, as an accountant. That's really shown out in terms of his dealing. But the fact is that in terms of the town centre, and I'll just clarify something for Asjad, in terms of the home bargain site, the council at the time, if you remember where we were 2 or 3 years ago, home bargains wanted exclusive use of that car park. So the council had a choice. Did we leave the Tesco site empty and keep hold of the Langstay car park? Or did we secure home bargains and obviously give the lease over or sell the car park over to them? The council at the time made, I think, a good decision, and home bargains is flourishing where it is. The other option was that home bargains would no longer be in the town. In terms of the bus station site, you're right, that is available, but at the price that it's available, I certainly would not sign up to going out to borrow money to buy the former bus station site at the price that's being asked for. That I'm not going to disclose what the prices are because obviously this is a public meeting. It'll be dealt with elsewhere, will that matter? Well, the fact is that as an Elson councillor, and Councillor Asjad Mahmood, Zafar Ali and Nadeem Ahmed will clearly recollect that the Air Centre, one of the things that was constantly pushed back at us, even in the days of Brian Cookson, was, look, we want use of that car park across the road. And we pushed back and said, no, there's not enough car parking in Nelson. So until he finds us a site, we'll do it. The fact is that we've got the option to buy this. But as I agree entirely with what Councillor David Whip is saying, is that if we're buying it to take on a liability, then I'm sorry to say I can't sign up to that. Because at the moment, there are no business rates payable on that premises because of the way the owners have done to the build, or other people have done to the building what they've done to the building. And I think it'd be remiss of us if we were to buy the building for 350,000 and just leave it in the hope that, Sarah Coven Price one day wins the lottery and comes along and gives us £2 or £3 million to refurbish it, and we'll call it the Coven Price Centre. That realistically is not going to happen. So I think we need to be realistic and move forward. In terms of the planning application of the conservation area, absolutely take that on board. We've been there previously in terms of conservation areas, and that's a planning process. That is nothing in essence with respect to do with this committee. That's part of the planning process, which Neil and his officers will pick up independently of what we as a council want to do. So I would urge colleagues to support the recommendations and move forward, because 750,000 from the government pays for the acquisition, pays for ideally what we want to do. 750,000 does not pay for the acquisition and refurb of that building. Let me tell you that now. Sarah, I'm going to give you wanted to come back in. I'm going to give you the final word because you've been relatively quiet tonight.
I think it would make superb residential flats potentially, and I think that we owe it to look into things properly, have an options report and a full conservation area appraisal. I'm just so conscious that this looks like a decision that could be made in haste. And actually, I think Nelson will be more sustainable with more people living in the centre of it.
Well, let me help you with that. And I know Dean's itching to come in, but in terms of residential, we've spoken to both the major residential social landlords in the borough and outside the borough. They've just taken one look at it and just simply walked away. They're not interested. So I'm going to move to the vote. It's been moved and seconded, the recommendations. If you're in favour, favour. If you're against, against. If you want to abstain, abstain. Councillor Nadeem Ahmed.
For.
Councillor Zafar Ali.
For.
Councillor Mohammed Aslam.
For.
Councillor David Clegg.
For.
Councillor Sarah Coburn-Price.
Against.
Councillor Paul Foxley.
Against.
Councillor Mike Goulthorpe.
For.
Councillor Mohammed Iqbal. For. Councillor Yasser Iqbal.
For.
Councillor Ashjan Mahmood.
Against.
Councillor Jonathan Nixon.
Against.
Councillor David Whip.
For.
And Councillor Tom Whip. Tom?
For.
Oh, thank you. Jane, I make that 9 in favour and 4 against.
Yes, I would agree, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 8 is the community engagement framework.
Can I move this?
Yeah, I'll second that. Everybody okay with that? Yeah, thank you very much. Item 9 is the tenders there just for information. We've dealt with item 10, and then there were 2 things that I agreed to bring forward from full council. Can I just check that Councillor Greaves is still with us?
Councillor Greaves has been with you all night, listening to some of the most astonishing rubbish I've ever heard in my life. But,
you do miss this committee, don't you, Tony? That's
No.
what it is.
I sat here for 2.5 hours thinking, thank God I'm not a member anymore.
That's fine. Well,
No, quite interesting.
okay,
Right.
so the first thing that was referred from full council was the climate ecology bill. So, Tony, do you want to lead on that?
Well, the motion is there. There was a very long motion from the campaign group that's in favour of it and campaigning for it, asking us to agree to all sorts of details. But I thought the best thing to do, since it's a private member's bill, it will get a second reading, probably. Very important it does. And then it will stop and it won't go any further, I don't think. And therefore, there's just no point in committing to every detail. In any case, some of the details are wrong in my view. But it doesn't matter. The overall principle of the bill is right. It ought to be passed by the Commons. The bill ought to go into committee, and it then ought to come to the Lords. It won't do that because there isn't time before there's probably going to be the end of session and a new session starting in, I don't know when, June perhaps. So it won't have time, but it can then be reintroduced. So I would just urge that we pass the motion that I agreed with Yvonne, Vice Chair, and I can't remember if I agreed it with Jonathan as well. I was a bit harassed at the time. However, that's what I would ask you to do.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Tom?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to support this motion. I think it's a great thing, really. Yeah, happy to second.
No, you have to move it. Tony's not a member of this committee.
Well, very good.
I
I move that we accept the motion.
Okay, Jonathan, are you seconding, Tom?
Happy to second. Regrettably, I can't attend the climate emergency working group meetings at the moment because they're being held during the day, but I'm happy to second it, of course. Thank you.
That's fine. Everybody in agreement? Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
then the second one from full council was about fireworks.
Yeah, well, it speaks for itself, doesn't it? It's not an easy thing to do because it's not an easy thing to get a grip on. But I asked the government what could be done to clamp down further on the use of fireworks, except on particular occasions, particular festivals and so on, and by organised groups. And there's a huge, I think, groundswell of opinion now that ought to happen, and that people who've got big gardens and can let them off perfectly reasonably and at reasonable hours ought to accept that there's a slight loss of liberty there in the interests of everybody who lives in tightly packed urban communities like Nelson Combe, Briarfield, where people let them off in back streets, they let them off at midnight. They do so in an ad hoc way. They do it at weddings, they do it goodness knows what else, or they just do it for a long period of time now, around November the 5th and around New Year's Eve, Old Year's Night, or whatever you call it, and so on. And the effect on a lot of people living on their own or in their own houses, couples, and even more the effect on animals, and it's both pets and it's wild animals as well, but particularly the effect on pets. I think anybody who's got a pet who is terrified by these, some pets manage to cope perfectly well with them, but a huge number don't. So there is an increasing groundswell. So I asked the government, and what they said was local authorities have plenty of powers to do whatever they want to do, and they can use Antisocial Behaviour Bill, Antisocial Behaviour Act legislation, public space protection orders, and I asked the minister, could a local authority make a public space protection order for the whole authority and lay down some clear rules for use of fireworks? And they said if they want to do that, they can do it, yeah. So I am not suggesting we should do that, because there are arguments both ways, and there's arguments about whether it's the right and proper thing to do, whether it's an unnecessary imposition on people's liberty. There are arguments about the enforcement of it, but I'm suggesting that the authority should consider the matter and look at it, and we can then make a decision.
Okay, thanks, Tony. David?
Well, I would move that we do look at this. I agree. It is an issue that causes a great deal of concern. All members, more long-standing members, will be very familiar with my point of view that there really ought to only be organised fireworks displays, and that comes as much from a safety perspective as a nuisance issue. Whether or not, as the government believe, that local authorities have the ability to wave a magic wand and get rid of any nuisance, I am rather sceptical, and we've been around the houses on this on more than one occasion. But yeah, if there is scope for us to do something further, then let's have a look at that. My own preference would be for proper legislation from government, and that would be the way to deal with it. And I think there's a certain degree of buck passing going on here, which really isn't very helpful. But I move the proposal as set out.
Okay, I'm happy to second that, and what I'd ask officers to do is to bring a report back to a future policy committee meeting, which looks what government legislation allows us to do, and if we have the power to do something, I think, of course, cross-party would all chomp at the bits to do something. I've got Councillor Tom Whip next.
Chairman, Councillor Goulthorpe did have his hand raised before me.
All right. Go on, Mike.
Yeah, just to say, Chairman, thank you for that. I've got to say, I find it very, very difficult that I have to agree 100% with Lord Greaves. It is a big issue. It does need looking at
point of order. In this context, I'm Councillor Greaves. Please.
Okay. It's just that your name comes up as Lord Greaves. So
all right. Go on,
Mike,
go on.
A technical term, Councillor Greaves, I very much agree with everything he's said. However, I also agree with Councillor Witt's comments that we are in a position, it does need looking at again, but of course, we cannot do this in isolation. We're surrounded by all the other authorities, other boroughs and so on. So whatever we do in Pendle, whether it's restricting sales or hours or whatever, it's still going to be policed. But yes, I would agree with the sentiments. But I also feel it's going to be difficult to do it as a council. But there we go. Thank you, Chairman.
It's a valid point, Mike. But I think if we take the lead, we can ask other colleagues across certainly Lancashire to follow suit at their respective councils. Tom?
Thank you, Chair. While I do believe in personal freedoms, I think it only goes so far as those freedoms not affecting other people. And I think fireworks certainly do, to some people, a lot more than others, significantly more than others. And that's why I believe that, yeah, there should be only organised groups that are allowed to use them. As Councillor Greaves said, maybe a PSPO is not the way to go, but certainly should be looked into.
Thank you. Sarah?
Just a little bit of advice I would suggest, if we're talking about practicalities, that officers really consult with the police and find out about how they would police this. Because if they say if we put forward an idea that's actually impossible for them, then it's unworkable, and we need to make sure that any policy is workable.
Thank you. Jonathan?
My hand was down. It was just a trivial point, Mr. Chair. I sometimes find it quite amazing how you can go into a supermarket or any odd shop and buy a set of fireworks and explode what is effectively an exploding rocket without a license. Basically, I'm a simple person, and with that simple sort of mentality, you got to buy a gun. You got to have a license, but you can buy a firework willy-nilly. Over a certain age. That's a completely pointless thing to say, really, Chair. It's got my hand was down, but never mind. Too late.
That's fine, Jonathan. Okay, so everybody happy with that course of action? Yeah. Okay, that concludes the meeting. Just a couple of things from me. First of all, I want to thank everybody for your cooperation this year. You've all been a fantastic committee, including the guests that we've had. Wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and enjoy the festivities as you can over the next few days. Councillors David Whip and Nadeem Ahmed, you need to stay on this. Dean wants a word.